Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, uh, human heated planet, still a pandemic wrapped planet. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way in big chunks of the US where there's been a normalization of pathogens, but it's still there. And there's a couple billion people on the planet with no vaccination at all. So it's with us for a long time. There's another phenomenon with us right now. It's very troubling, which is Putin's war and its impact on just about everything. Food prices, which we don't really notice in middle class America, but you absolutely will see becoming an enormous problem in the North Africa and the Middle East. We have energy spiking prices. We have complete disruptions. Europe just today pledged to get off of Russian oil by the end of this year. That's an extraordinary thing to do. And so we're going to talk about this today from several standpoints. Jigar Shah, who is just coming on here. Jigar, I don't know if you can hear me.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. I don't know if you can face the camera where we are. We're actually to your left, if I'm reading your room.
Oh, fascinating.
There's a camera looking at the map. There's a map on your wall. And if you stare the opposite direction of that map, you'll be staring right at me. There we go.
How about I just change what camera it comes from?
Whatever you just did was perfect. And a special guest, Kathy Kowalski, who covers energy news in the Ohio region, and I'll show you some of her work in a minute, is with us as well. And Jigar, as I was saying, looking to the bigger screen here, there's this other phenomenon with us right now.
Yeah.
Which is a complete and utter bollocks and a tragedy and a travesty for those directly affected, millions and millions of Ukrainians. But now it's spilling into energy prices, and that affects everyone who's poor, particularly food prices, fertilizers made with energy, with gas, and we've only just begun to see these reverberations. Jigar Shah has been in the clean energy game, one way or the other, for at least a couple of decades. You were born in the 70s. I was born in the 50s. So I'm trying to remember when did you jump onto this issue? Now you're at the Department of Energy running a loan program, but I'd love to give people a quick sense of how you became who you are so far. And obviously it's been a lot of jumps, so you don't have to go through all of them. But what's your driving force as you've jumped across all these?
Well, I immigrated to this country, and first of all, thanks for having me on. I mean, I immigrated to this country in 1975, and then, grew up in a small town, Sterling, Illinois, in rural Illinois, and, read about energy when I was 16 and got the bug and thought it was really cool. And I'd say my angle on all this stuff has been commercialization. Right? Like my angle on this is that if solar panels are so cool, and at the time, nuclear power as well caught my eye in that book, why are we doing much of it? Right. And, I grew up near the Byron nuclear power plant, which was one of the last nuclear power plants to be built in this country. And so, my rabbit hole that I'm still lost down is, why did technologies that we all think are ready for prime time not get picked up? Like what is the cause of the inertia? What is the cause of the way people make decisions? And then once you figure out the answer to those questions, and obviously the answers are different across, building technologies and energy efficiency or renewable energy or transportation and EVs or, agricultural related technologies and whatnot. Then the question is like, is there a market-based mechanism by which to solve the problem, right? I'm not a public policy guy per se, so I'm not as adept as other people are at passing laws, but I'm pretty adept at figuring out how to rework the markets to help solve some of these problems. And that's been, I would say the through line for most of my life.
So that's why you're in this particular niche at the Department of Energy. There's the EERE, there's the technology side, there's still a fossil energy side, but you're at the loan program. And can you just give a snapshot of what that means? It seems, wonky and surprising to some probably.
Yeah, I mean, at the core of what we do is we're basically a public policy bank, right? So we've got $43 billion of loan authority left. we make roughly $500 million a year in interest for the U.S. taxpayer. So, the program makes money. People request loans. And so, today we have 77 active loan applications and roughly asking for $79 billion of loan proceeds. And, it's across roughly 20 sectors, concentrated in about 12 or 13 sectors, highlighted by battery storage and nuclear and carbon sequestration, transmission, hydrogen, et cetera. And when you receive a loan application, not unlike the loan application you receive for somebody who wants to start a bar or a restaurant or whatever else, you say, what are the chances you're going to get patrons to come to this place? Like, what's so different about you versus the other 12 bars on the street? Right. And, like, why do you think you're going to make a go of it? Right. And so as a result, we know exactly what they're claiming their business model is. Like, why is this green hydrogen plant going to work? Right. Like, why do you think you're going to get paid enough to make this carbon sequestration and storage project work? Why are people going to use this 800-mile transmission line that you're trying to build, or whatever it is? Right. And as a result, we have insights that come from that. Oh, they think that the price of ammonia is going to go up, or they think that people are willing to pay a premium for clean ammonia, or whatever it is that they are claiming in the application. And of course, our job is to pressure test all those assumptions so that we don't lose money on behalf of the U.S. taxpayer. But through that pressure testing, we get a lot of insights. And as a result, we have a lot to share with the rest of DOE. We're like, did you know that a lot of people within our applicant base thinks that this is going to happen? Interesting insight, right? Like, or did you know that, like, they believe that this rule over at the Environmental Protection Agency is, like, blocking their ability to move these things forward? Was that intentional? Right? They believe that, that this particular thing that we're doing. And so as a result, we not only function as this public policy bank, but we have this broader role within, the U.S. government with all these insights.
That's really neat. Sort of a sensory system, some feedback system. But it must be hard. Like, I already know NEPA we're seeing more and more examples where the National Environmental Policy Act, decades old tool that environmentalists have loved in many aspects, is really impeding or can really slow down some of the things that are needed to have this renewable expansion. Is the feedback resonating enough? Like, how does that play out?
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing, right? I mean, I think we all have to figure out what we're solving for, right? I mean, I think whether you're building a gigawatt-sized solar project or wind project, or whether you're building a gigawatt-sized nuclear project, or, building out pipelines for CO2 capture, or, every single thing that we might do is disruptive to someone, right? Like, that is a definitional thing. And so the question becomes, what level of disruption is unfair and, targeting communities over and over and over again? And what level of disruption is something we're going to find acceptable in exchange for rapid decarbonization of the electricity grid by 2035 and the, overall economy by 2050? And so, clearly there's some bright lines here, right? So, I mean, those I think are well understood, but there's definitely a lot of gray areas as well. And so I think we're going through those gray areas now and trying to figure out, where those are. And I'm happy to explore those more deeply with you.
And we have a fairly limited time here, so I want to get Kathy Ann into the mix with that regional perspective too. But there's one thing, let's do that now, and I'll get back to a couple questions. So, Kathy Ann, can you just describe your beat and your part of the country and how this resonates for you?
Sure. I report Energy News Network, mostly for the Midwest region, and I specifically focus mostly on Ohio. And we have both the Marcellus and the Utica shale plays under parts of Ohio. We have sections of the state that would be perfect for wind, except the state legislature about 7 years ago pretty much put a halt to most new wind by triggering setbacks. We have a large part of the southwest part of the state that is prime area for solar, except that last year there were additional requirements enacted in the legislature to try to get solar up and running. And on the side, we also are the center of the largest corruption case in Ohio history, which went to try to subsidize 2 nuclear plants and 2 coal plants that are older than I am.
Yeah, I can't even fathom how busy you are right now. I mean, just the Rand Dazzler alone probably keeps you busy every single week.
It's never boring. There's actually enough going on that we started a regular newsletter about it.
Oh my
Really?
gosh.
Wow. So how does this, I was talking with Kathy a little earlier about the capacity to seek loans. And it was reminding me of issues that I've reported on the adaptation and disaster recovery side, where too often, sorry, my brand new iPhone, but I don't know how to use that. Just being called. Those who have means know how to work the system. They know how to get a grant. They know how to get a loan. And those in communities who don't have that capacity lose. So Justice 40 is this initiative that's part of that. But Kathy, I want to bring it back to you, like for questions, how that relates to your readers. What Jigar can help them with?
Yeah. So as I was thinking about that, one of the things I saw, Jigar, is, you all deal with loans. What types of loans do you think would be helpful now for trying to get more clean energy onto the market, which could help offset some of the carbon emissions? And how does that differ for either urban areas or rural areas? And in particular, for businesses that have, are often minority owned and may not have the traditional access to capital or the savvy to try to navigate the process?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and one that I don't have an easy answer for. So I would say that there's a couple things that we've done. One is that, we just reissued our solicitation for Title 17 and made it far simpler and easier to read. It was in, sort of impenetrable government speak before, and now I think it's less like impenetrable and shorter and easier. I think we've also added 17 full-time folks in the outreach and business development group that literally hold people's hands through the process, and so you don't have to have all this expertise. You can just call them and do a pre-consultation, and they'll tell you if you qualify or not, or what changes you might have to make in order to qualify. And so that part's become easier. I think the part that we haven't solved is the top-down part of things, right? And remember, as a loan program, right, I'm not really allowed to develop the projects, right? Like someone else has developed the projects and they have to come to me and ask me for a loan. Now, I can certainly point out to other parts of the government that, hey, we are missing projects in rural areas that look like this, or in urban areas that look like that. And there are other parts of DOE that provide grants to provide some of that. So for instance, the Department of Energy recently has launched this Communities Leaps program, where they're taking a lot of justice communities who have very specific ideas on how they actually want to use our office and other offices to be able to bring a lot more resources into their community, but they need a planning grant to really figure out how to put the whole project together. You see the same thing out of the Office of Indian Energy for tribes, and they're doing a lot of great work there. And that's led to multi-$100 million applications coming into Loan Programs Office as a result of these communities receiving planning grants and things like that to be able to put these pieces together. Like, for instance, a virtual power plant, right? Many communities have 1/15 of all their appliances fail every year, right? Because appliances generally last 15 years. And when they fail, they always fail at the wrong time, and you have $85 worth of food in them, and you don't want to lose it. So you end up with a 30% interest loan with, some person who you call first to replace the refrigerator. And if we can intervene there, we can give you a loan at more like 8% for 10 years instead of 3 years. And so that's much more affordable, and we'll get you in a more energy efficient refrigerator so you can participate in connected DER and DERMS programs and other programs in the future under first quarter 22-22. And so there are these points of intervention that we can do, but someone has to come to us and say, I have a community, they are not being served by this thing. We have this ability to bring in these resources to unlock these opportunities. We're working with this financial platform and we're doing this, and this, right? And so there's some of that, but some of the other things that we're working on in these communities is, for instance, there are many entrepreneurs who are looking at 1,000 vehicle rollouts of electric vehicles with electric vehicle chargers that communities can rent at $150 or $200 a week, right? You've got AES that's piloting that in Indianapolis through the utility that they own. You've got other companies who are doing something similar, and they're largely focused initially on like Uber and Lyft drivers, many of whom are LMI folks or folks who, drive for DoorDash or some Instacart or other people like that. But then there's also people saying, actually, we're preyed upon by subprime auto. And, if I didn't have to put any money down, I could just get a car for $200 a week. Actually, that's cheaper than something else. I mean, some folks are actually using it because they've got, a car in the repair shop and Enterprise is charging them $400 a week for a car, and their insurance only reimburses $30 a day. And so this is actually a much more affordable way of doing that. So, so there's all these business models that, yes, serve the LMI community, but also serve, practical things that people need around rental cars when they, have their car in the shop. And so when you think about where our program can be helpful, there's lots of places we can be helpful, and we can certainly tease people and say, well, here's places where we're receiving loan applications. You should try to get your community to put together a loan application in this area. But we can't do that for them. They have to come to us and ask us for the loan.
Okay.
So sorry.
I guess my next question was kind of, what's the time frame, and then how does this play into trying to solve this energy crisis that we're facing right now in the market?
Well, I think the time frame is dependent upon the applicant, right? Like, we have a checklist of documents they have to submit to us, and some folks take 2 years to submit the checklist, and some people can do it in 60 days. And the folks who can do it in 60 days, we can generally process their loan in 5 to 8 months, right? And there's some folks that I'm still working on from March of last year that still hasn't filled out the paper out properly. So, and so we're working with them on it. We don't judge people for that, but it does extend the timeline. The other thing I'd say is it really depends on who the sponsor is. So sometimes the sponsor has to be a nonprofit or, it's funded by a foundation. But other times the sponsor could be the city of Cincinnati or the city of Dayton or the city of Columbus or whatever it is, right? And they could come to us because, they may say, well, we want to do this. We, like, for instance, Cincinnati, I know well because I did a lot of business with them in the private sector. And I saw the mayor just lost in the Democratic primary yesterday, and for governor, but or the old mayor. And so, but they own a lot of public parking lots, for instance, in Cincinnati. They could put EV chargers at all those parking lots and actually have cars there, right? That they then lend out to both city employees and also these other folks that we talked about, right? And they could lead the whole thing, and then we could provide the debt to it, because they might say, well, we don't really want our bond rating to be impacted by this loan, so therefore we want debt to come from the loan programs office. Or they might say, we don't want to be involved in the business at all, so we're just going to auction off the spots to other private sector people who want to use those spots to put EVs and charging stations in. And then that private sector company says, well, I won the RFP with the city, and so I now have the right to put my cars here for 10 years. And I'd like to borrow money from you, Jigar, because I'm going to make money off of all these folks who rent cars from those things, right? So in that case, the city had to initiate the RFP, and without that RFP and then the winner of that RFP, I'll give you an example of that. For instance, like Montgomery County Schools, right, did an RFP for school buses and then awarded 200 school buses, electric school buses, to a company called Highland Electric, right? So, but Montgomery County Schools had to initiate that RFP. And so the school district would have to initiate the RFP. And there's, $2.5 billion worth of rebate money available from the federal government in the bipartisan infrastructure law for people who want to, switch to electric school buses.
Okay, great.
So That's great. And this gets to, I think, my next question, which is about scaling. It's something that was really embedded in what Kathy was saying. I, think about, like, just last week, David Roberts, who you know very well, a longtime climate
Yeah,
energy journalist, he finally bought an EV.
I
And
saw that he got
and
a
but
used Bolt or something, right?
yes, 2017 Bolt that I guess it'll have an improved battery because it's under that warranty. But
Yeah,
it took, so here he is, he's a zealot, a climate hawk. He invented the term climate hawk, I think. And it took him until now to get a used Bolt. And in my home front, 1996, this house, the last house I owned, had 2 oil tanks in the basement and no insulation. It was built in the 30s. We insulated it. We got it kind of geared up. We could not afford to switch from oil through the time we owned it. And it was only in 2022, January this year, that the new owners ripped everything out. They're a lot wealthier and have a new system. They also expanded the footprints. They're using more, the Jevons
yeah,
paradox. But they're off of oil. That oil, the one oil tank in their basement they didn't take out is just like for storage. Scale and inertia, And you're a driving guy, right? You started the carbon war room. So how do you personally step back from your internal understanding of urgency
yeah.
and make a choice about where you're spending your time here in this program and stay sane? How does that work?
Well, it's hard, honestly, right? Like, I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, I mean, I'm an optimist. I wake up every morning and I put on a brave face and put a smile on your face, and you work hard every day. But I mean, when the data comes out every year from the IPCC, I mean, it scares anybody who knows how to read. I mean, like, you read that stuff and you're like, what? Like, I mean, what future is my child who's 6, is going to have, right? I mean, it freaks us all out. But you can't be paralyzed by that fear. It's got to drive you to try to do more every day. The one thing I'd say, though, about your own experience on the 2 oil tanks and, and how that relates to other people's experiences, I've always been the kind of person who looks at the system and doesn't do the politics of personal responsibility. Like, I find that whole, like, people should recycle. Really? They should recycle, right? We have extended producer responsibility in Europe. Here, we tell people to recycle, right? Like, I mean, and say, well, it's your fault that we don't, like, have a circular economy when, in Michigan, they just charge you an extra 10 cents a bottle or a can. And amazingly, everyone returns them and they get recycled because, there's public policy there. So, like, I think this notion that, like, you're at fault because you weren't able to convert your 2 tanks to air source heat pumps is the wrong way of thinking about it. The question is, from a systems thinking point of view, how is it in the best interest of the Northeast to have 5 million homes burning fuel oil today with Ukraine and
Right.
Russia going on? And, it costs $6 a gallon right now to fill up your tank. It is most certainly cost effective to switch to anything other than fuel oil right now. And the amount of health impacts from people burning fuel oil is outrageous. So the amount of money that is being paid for by the state in terms of people's, impacts on, lungs and, and breathing and all that stuff is crazy, right? And so it is high time that we just switch everybody over, right? And now the question is, how do you do it systemically? Well, we have PACE financing. We have on-bill financing in New York, for instance, that we've had on the books for a long time. Efficiency Maine is doing a lot of work in Maine, for instance, to get things done. And the Loan Programs Office can provide a guarantee to all those loans. And so we can reduce the interest rate on them further to help people get into these things. And so, and in general, there are these points of replacement, right? Like, appliances do fail regularly. And at that moment, you need a solution then. You can't start a 3-month planning cycle, right? You need a new air conditioner that day because it's hot outside. And so we need to be prepared. We have to say, well, when that happens, we have a loan product. We have, air source heat pumps in inventory, and they can be pulled up on a truck and they can be brought to your house and installed that day. And, that is the responsibility of the system to have those solutions mapped out so that when someone wants to intervene and when someone wants to make that change, that the system is there to support them, right? And I find that sometimes we have these disparate solutions, but they're not systematized so that it's one phone call by the homeowner to get the whole thing done. And that is the responsibility not only of the federal government, but also the state energy offices and the electric utilities and many others who are in that supply chain. And we're working hard, largely for the first time, but I think also improving on previous efforts to get that done. But I do think that, we are in a moment of crisis today. We've got to figure this out.
Right. So Kathy and I are going to go a little longer after you have to jump off for a White House meeting or the like. But I want to get one last thought from you, which is if there's one thing that you can see happening, whether it's legislative, something that Manchin would buy into, or extra legislative, something that we haven't thought of that could really get to this point you're talking about, to make it more organic for a homeowner or somebody to make these changes. What's something like that look like?
Well, look, I think that we have thousands, actually tens of thousands of people who are already active on these issues, right? And we have hundreds of thousands of people, according to Tony Leishowitz's work over in the Six Americas study, that are emotionally impacted by climate change, right? They actually think about it all the time, right? And when you think about what this takes, we have 19,500 organized cities and towns and communities in this country. That's it, 19,500. 14,500 of them have a population that's less than 5,000, right? And so what this requires is sustained effort at the local level, always, right? When the transit authority makes the decision to replace old diesel buses with something else, they need to choose electric buses. And we have programs to pay for it. But if the transit agency doesn't apply for the program, it doesn't happen. And I can't force them to do it from the federal government. All I can do is say, here are all of the resources. But someone in local community can force them to make a decision that's in their own best financial interest. The same thing's true with the way in which school buses are done. Only 50% of streetlights in this country are LED. We could replace all the rest of the streetlights with LED lights. It's like an 8-month payback, right? The amount of school rooftops that don't have solar on them when it's fully financeable and you save money from day one, right? Brookfield bought Constellation's commercial and industrial solar division, and they do rooftops all day, right? Electric vehicles for Lyft and Uber drivers today, with gasoline prices still at $4 a gallon, it is way cheaper to go electric for those drivers. But instead, most of the tax credits are used by wealthy people who live close to their work, right? Not the ones who are driving 20,000 miles a year for their job, but instead people are driving 6,000 miles a year because they live right next to where they work, right? And so how do we figure out how to get this done? But also police officers, right? Police officers in general idle their vehicles and have 1 kilowatt worth of electric load on their car running all the time. So if you've ever seen a police car, it's always idling because
right around the block for me.
And it's at 90 cents a kilowatt hour to run those electric appliances off the alternator. 90 cents a kilowatt hour. It's a 2.5-year payback to switch those police cars to electric vehicles, right? And I think that for whatever reason, everyone's, it's the red or blue issue. It's not. Most of the police forces that have moved over to electric are in red districts. And so what it takes is someone who actually is willing to spend a few extra hours every week to say, you know what, I want to make my community better. And the federal government's passed $1.2 trillion to support that. But we can't force it top down. That's not how our country works, right? It's got to be forced at the local level with resources that we provide to that, change maker and that muckraker.
That's so great. And you've just laid out a landscape that really does flip things around from this sort of frustrated paralysis with inaction by Congress. In other words, the left, to me, on this issue has made this all about Manchin and Sinema and the Senate. And you're saying there's this landscape out there just with a little incentive, with a little motivation and reach and sharing that can do some huge things. What you said about EV police cars in red districts. That's a great story. I haven't seen that story. I guess I should write it.
I intend to tell readers apply for money.
Absolutely.
Loan.
Please apply for money. I mean, the Department of Energy got $62 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure law. That is the most money that the Department of Energy has received in its 45-year history. Inflation adjusted. And we all talk about inflation these days. And so, that's a lot of money. And so
Right.
that's what that money is for, is to help people make these. The last thing I would say to you is that, particularly on the justice issues, I think justice matters a lot. And I think we're very committed to figuring that out. But part of justice is unlocking wealth creation, right? And, making sure that all Americans understand that this is the largest source of wealth creation on the planet. The richest guy in the world, Elon Musk, made his money off of climate change solutions, right? And I think that for whatever reason, we're not recognizing that if you want to make a lot of money right now, you don't do it in crypto. You make your money by figuring out how to be the guy that helps the police force switch to electric vehicles. You figure out, how to be the girl who basically figures out how to put solar on all these roofs. Like, you figure out how to actually do that, and you get paid to make those changes.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Well, yeah, if and when you have time, I'd love to revisit some of these issues. I could do it like a town hall with you and local officials.
Well, I'd be honored. I'd be honored to do it, because we really are at an extraordinary moment right now where these solutions really do exist and they're ready to go. And they create extraordinary jobs. I mean, the people who make these improvements are tradespeople, and they get paid pretty well.
Yeah, and there's at least one journalist that we both know, Nathaniel Johnson, who's left his journalism at Chris to become an electrician, and he's working nonstop in Berkeley.
That's right. That's
electrifying
absolutely right.
Everything.
I think I need an electrician. I should call him. Although I live in DC, he might actually come out.
There's a shortage. He said, and this is something we didn't get into. If you have another minute, we didn't get into the education component here.
Well, but this is the other piece of it, though, Andy. We have money that has been sent to vocational schools, has been sent to community colleges, has been sent to other people for exactly the purpose of training people, right? But they're not going to set up a training program unless someone locally tells them, I'm willing to hire 3 people a year from your program to do electrical work, or to do roofing work, or to do plumbing work, or whatever it is, right? And so that money is already sitting at the community college where they can use it to create curriculum. And I mean, this kind of curriculum has already been invented, so that's not the issue. But but the problem is that we can't force them from our vantage point to use that money to train tradespeople. The local contractors have to go to their local community college and say, I know you have money. Can you please set up a training program so I can hire a lot of people? And please start it at 16 years old, because we're allowing kids to get lost and to take on a bunch of college debt when they don't need to, when I'm willing to get them on a pathway to $100,000 a year job at 16 years old, if they're willing to go directly into vocational school to do that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to use at least another few webcasts on here to drive some of these points home. They're the simplest curriculum element that can be added. It doesn't require anything, is a boiler room tour. I wrote about this one 5 or 6 years ago in the Bronx. I told Bill Gates about it. I've told everybody about it. The kids go to the boiler room. The custodian who manages the energy system is the teacher for the day.
I love this.
And they learn systems. And that's actually a specialized high school, public high school, to train kids to go into HVAC, heating, cooling. And boy, do we need more of that. At least to me, it seems.
I totally agree. Well, it was such a pleasure to be with you, and thanks for your interest in what we're doing.
And good luck with all your work. And let's revisit sometime.
All right.
Thanks.
Hang in there, Kathy. We're going to keep talking.
Sure.
Well, that was cool.
It was very helpful. Because I know that.
So what are some of your takeaways?
I think one of the things that I take away is that whereas a lot of people tend to be focusing on big picture, like in Ohio, our state government has been, dominated by a lot of pro-fossil fuel sentiment. But the progress that we've made, to the extent we've made it, has largely been on the local level. So I think that concept very much hits home. And I think the guidance on how to go about trying to apply for some of this is helpful. And I think that, it fits in well with one of the things that I read in terms of background on this whole energy crisis is, in part what we did was we now have this global market that derives from petroleum and that has ripple effects pretty much throughout. And as you start getting more and more clean energy, it appears that you can insulate parts of the system from that volatility. And the volatility was this error in assumptions that was made, maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago when people said, oh yeah, we know we had renewable standards, but we want to try to chop them down now, right? And the whole purpose then was coal prices were high. Just because coal prices are no longer high doesn't mean that there isn't volatility from something else. So that seemed like a pretty big takeaway.
Yeah, and a lot of these stories, I don't read everything, obviously, and no one can. But that idea that the majority of police forces that have started buying electric vehicles are in red districts seems like a story. I probably was on the page 1 of the New York Times already or something about it.
I mean, I think it's a great point and certainly something to follow up on. And I know a couple of areas that we're looking into trying to focus on their vehicle fleet as one of the first areas when they joined a Clean Cities initiative here in Ohio. And actually the Republican head of the Senate and head of the Speaker of the House, both are from that area. So yeah, there's some truth to that.
And I guess to me, the takeaway still is if you look at mainstream high-level coverage of the climate energy issue, it's still hyper-focused on legislation in Congress and gridlock. Mm-hmm. When everything we just heard there, from a guy who could spend his time doing a lot of other things, mm-hmm. It was about bottom up. It wasn't about...
Right. And money matters to people, right? If right. You tell them this is going to save you money, I remember being, in my 20s and reading the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And one of the first messages that I had, granted, it was a memo for a lot of public bodies, but it was like, hey, you can get money from this. Yes, you got to do stuff, but you can get money. And yeah, bottom line matters. And that's why energy efficiency matters so much.
Yeah. And there too, at least in New York State, we have this 40 or 50-year-old entity, NYSERDA. It's the New York State Energy Research, something or other agency. And they peel away a tiny fraction of some revenue and create a really big pool of money for research on driving efficiency, for example, and on programs. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure not every state has a NYSERDA. No. I guess Efficiency Maine, so Maine has something like that. But.
Right, and it's the idea is if essentially energy efficiency to some extent, especially in the electricity market, functions to offset demand, and so it becomes, it works on the supply side. Right. So it's a resource.
Right. Well, it's good to meet you. That was a blitz, kind of a very quick. I have to digest my notes. I'm gonna transcribe it using at least the transcribing rough tool and try to write up some of the nuggets because I think he hit on some important points there.
No, he had some great points, and I loved how he was able to pick examples out of Ohio and the Midwest like that.
Yeah, he's that kind of guy.
I wish my mind worked like that. That was great.
Yeah. Well, Kathy Kowalski from Energy. It's
Energy News Network.
Network. Great. Focused on Ohio. Really good reporter. I'll be keeping track and hope everyone can follow you on Twitter. I think it's KM Kowalski.
Yep.
At KM Kowalski. And that's a wrap for this brief but really invigorating session of Sustain What from the Columbia Climate School. I'm Andy Revkin. Please send me your feedback, your ideas for future episodes. On Friday afternoon, we're doing another one on methane, the methane challenge, which relates to your focus on fracking and the like. We're going to have some people from the Environmental Defense Fund on who've been doing research for more than a decade in a program that they took heat for because it was with industry. But I'm a big fan of what they did because it was the only way they could get access to facilities to actually understand where the leakage is coming from. So Friday afternoon, we're going to do that.
Yeah, they have a virtual, ask about the virtual reality tool.
I will.
It lets you kind of go in and feel around and shut things down.
I'm making a note right now.
Thanks
care. Again. You
Thanks
take care.
for
Have a
having
good
me.
day. And these links can be shared with anyone right after we're done.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.